everyone. This is going to be a PowerPoint presentation on a comparison of Erasmus and Machiavelli in contrast to the six areas in relation with the Six Great Souls reading by David Aikman. So the six areas of comparison, moral authority, response to injustice, religion, integrity and truth, suffering and leadership, and lastly followed by influence and legacy. True leadership is moral authority, not formal authority. Leadership is a choice, not a position. The choice is to follow universal timeless principles, which will build trust and respect from the entire organization. Those with formal authority alone will lose this trust and respect. So the whole point of this quote is that formal authority has to be applied together with moral authority, because when you only have formal authority without the moral authority, it can bring about some issues, especially based on integrity and values and virtues. So the first point is on moral authority. Machiavelli is more of a pragmatist and believes in using ruthless tactics to maintain power and get things done. There's a quote from page 110 to 111 that states, "The reflexive verb assi curarsi is used by Machiavelli in the sense of to protect oneself, one's life, position, or power, and such self-protection implies killing, eliminating, or neutralizing one's enemies." He says that a ruler who has reconquered a rebellious state or territory will be more ruthless in consolidating his power. Erasmus, on the other hand, tries to encourage a Christian prince to always hold moral virtues. Doesn't matter what the situation is. And there's a quote that says, "Let him become convinced of this, that what Christ teaches applies to no one more than a prince." So I think Christ in the Bible tries to let us know about the importance of morality, importance of having virtues, and the importance of having, peaceful ways to get things done, other than the use of force like Machiavelli tries to advocate for. So a great soul's example on moral virtues, I think Mother Teresa would fall into this category. She led through compassion and service, and this embodied Erasmus's ideals and rejecting Machiavellian tactics. To fulfill our mission of compassion and love to the poorest of the poor, we go seeking out in towns and villages all over the world the poorest, the abandoned, the sick, the infirm, and the leprosy patients, the dying, the desperate, the lost, the outcasts. So basically, Mother Teresa had to put aside all her, pride, and she had to go and help out the people that were the most helpless in society. And it takes a heart of compassion to do that. And this is more in line with Erasmus's view on virtue. The second point I'm going to touch on is a response to injustice. Machiavelli is seen as justifying harsh measures to suppress dissent and opposition in most of his works. And he tries to use fear to respond to this issue. But fear is sustained by a dread of punishment that is always effective. So when you instill fear in people, they're scared of doing certain things. So that's the best way to keep law and order in a society, according to Machiavelli. And then Erasmus, on the other hand, advocates for peaceful reform and dialogue to resolve disputes. You should then consider how desirable, how honorable, how wholesome a thing peace is. On the other hand, how calamitous as well as wicked a thing is war, and how even the most just wars bring with it a trail of evil. So sometimes we might try to justify using force, we might try to justify going to war, but even still, when we go to war, when we use violent means to resolve disputes, it always leads to something negative. Here's a quote from Romans 12:19 that says, "Vengeance is mine; I will repay," says the Lord. So we should not take vengeance and justice in our own hands, like Machiavelli might try to advocate. We should basically just try to be peaceful and avoid getting into conflict, and just leave it up all the rest up to the Lord. So a great soul's example in injustice. I think Nelson Mandela was the best person to use for the case of injustice. Nelson Mandela had both the Machiavellian and Erasmus approach. He first started out with the Machiavellian approach to solving disputes in a violent slash use of force manner so he could get attention. And then later along, when he got out of prison and eventually ended up in the South African presidency, I think he realized that it's much better to use peaceful methods to resolve disputes, and he had to have a heart of forgiveness. He actually had to forgive some of the oppressors and the people that supported the apartheid system in South Africa. Mandela forgave unconditionally, and he chose to believe that by displaying dignity and by consciously withholding animosity, he could accomplish far more than he could possibly achieve armed with a fistful of ultimatums. That's Aikman, page 123. Religion is the next point. Machiavelli used religion as a tool, like a means to an end, and its use was to consolidate the rulership of a leader rather than glorify God. The quote that I have from Machiavelli is, he was able to maintain armies with money from the church and from his subjects, and during that long war he was able to develop a powerful army whose achievements have subsequently brought him so much honor. So he wanted to use the position of the church to help him raise money, and he wanted to bring honor to himself and not the Lord. So that's how he used religion. And then Erasmus, on the other hand, advocates that religion should help a leader be guided towards personal and political authority. So he goes to ask, who is a true Christian? Not just someone who is baptized or confirmed who goes to Mass. Rather, it is someone who has embraced Christ in the depths of his heart and who expresses this by acting in a Christian spirit. That's on page 18. So I think the best example of religion from the great souls would be Billy Graham. He was an evangelist, and he was actually an international televangelist, and he was able to spread the message of Christ and the good news of the gospel all around the world. Billy Graham was able to use his knowledge of religion, specifically the Christian faith, to help bring an end to the practice of segregation that had long plagued most Southern Baptist colleges, despite the backlash that he was getting, because at that time it was agreed that discrimination and Jim Crow was actually kind of still in the South. So if you spoke out against some of these systems that were kind of like in place, some of the folks would kind of take you like you were trying to side more towards being a liberal kind of preacher. So he got a lot of backlash. He got a lot of flack for it, but he still stood to his ground. The same year, he told an audience at the Southern Baptist Convention that Baptist colleges were duty bound as Christian institutions to accept academically qualified black students. So I think it was really hard for certain African American students that wanted to enter some of the Southern Baptist colleges to actually get admission because of their skin color. So I think Billy Graham, over the course of his years, had to evolve and change his thinking and realize that actually it doesn't matter what skin color you have as long as you're able to apply the basics and you can actually get into the Baptist college. And this goes back into Martin Luther King's speech where he says, I have a dream where my children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So it's not good to judge someone just by the outer appearances, but by the content of their character is a much better way to judge people. Okay, integrity and truth. Machiavelli is more of a utilitarian, where the end justifies the means, basically, and the truth does not really matter as long as you can get what you want from trickery and deceit, which is not sometimes a good thing. There's a quote from the book that states, nevertheless, experience shows that in our times, the rulers who have done great things have held the keeping of their word of little account. so they don't keep their word. You're not supposed to keep your word. And have known how, by their cunning, to muddle the brains of men, and in the end have got the better of those who have based themselves in sincerity. So Machiavelli was trying to say that it's better to be cunning and deceitful than to be sincere. And sometimes it's not good to be a man of your word, which is not really being truthful. Someone that's truthful is supposed to be a man of their word, and they're not supposed to be cunning, and you're not supposed to be deceitful, because it can bring about problems later, especially in relationships. Erasmus believes that truth and integrity is foundational to leadership of a Christian prince, and a prince's prestige, his greatness, his regal dignity must not be established and preserved by noisy displays of privileged rank, but by wisdom, integrity, and right action. So integrity, I think, is the most important word in this quote from the book. A prince has to have integrity, and integrity helps a prince to have um, a basis for rulership, because when the followers and the people and his subjects actually see that we're dealing with someone who has integrity, it's much easier for them to follow what the prince has to say, leading by example. The great soul's example in integrity and truth is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. I'm not really content with that last name. So he exposed the Soviet oppression and the Gulag system through his written works and literature pieces. And there's a quote that he states, people should never permit falsehood of any kind to invade their conversations, their professional work, their meetings, or their writings. It was a simple choice he averred, either truth or falsehood. This ideology on truth was more in line or in tune with Erasmus's philosophy on integrity and truth. Okay, so this is a quote about truth, and it's inscribed on the wall of the Central Intelligence Agency in Virginia. And it states, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. It's a verse that comes from the Bible in John chapter 8, verse 32. And, even when it comes to intelligence, when you're collecting intelligence, you have to collect the right intelligence, intelligence that is truthful. When you get intelligence that's not truthful, it's not really intelligence. It can lead to a dangerous scenario situation. So the truth is very, very necessary. When people know the truth and people know what's going on, it's much easier to make decisions. Suffering in leadership. Machiavelli sees the use of suffering to control the populace, as suffering induces fear, and fear makes people dread doing bad things. So Machiavelli tries to use suffering as a way to instill fear in people, and he doesn't use it for the right purpose, because the Bible also states that suffering and perseverance are part of what it takes to be a Christian. But Machiavelli is more about using suffering to induce control over people. And I think it was done with his Messiah Romero de Orco, a cruel and energetic man, giving him full powers to bring a city under control that was involved in a lot of lawlessness and injustice. So he tried to use Romero de Orco to bring suffering upon the people, so you could put them in line. While Erasmus sees suffering as a crucible and necessity to moral growth. And this is sent from a good prince has the obligation of looking to the welfare of his people, even at the cost of his own life, if need be. So a prince should not really be thinking about himself, and if it means him having to, lose his throne or his authority, or even losing his life for the sake of the people will look at it as something good. So suffering, according to Erasmus, is more on the biblical perspective. So, great soul's example in suffering, I think Eli Wiesel was the best person that I could get from Great Souls, because he really suffered a lot through the Nazi occupation and being taken to I think it was Auschwitz, and having to look at his sister and mom and dad pass on. He was survived by, I think, his two sisters, and he ended up in an orphanage in I think it was in Peru, and he was able to get in contact with his family members. But Elie Wiesel was able to use his experience and first-hand accounts of suffering under Nazi German occupation to bring to attention the plight of other marginalized groups of people who were suffering. So the quote from the book is, Wiesel began to enlarge the focus of his concern for the oppressed ethnic groups. He traveled to Central America to draw attention to the issue of the mistreatment of the Mosquito Indians of Nicaragua. He saw the consequences of apartheid close up in South Africa. He was shocked by the suffering of Biafrans in the Nigerian Civil War that ended in 1970, and he continued to speak out on behalf of the Jews of the Soviet Union. So he was not only looking towards expanding the plight of the Jewish suffering, but he was actually able to bring to table the suffering of a lot more other marginalized groups, and this was a way to show that he was not really just about the Jewish thing. He basically didn't want a world where suffering was being orchestrated on people and nothing was being done about it. So the last point is on influence and legacy. The Machiavellian approach to influence is more geared towards doing whatever it takes to gain control, even if it means wiping out a whole city or a group of people to consolidate power and legacy. I was not able to get a direct quote for this, but it can just generally be agreed that Machiavelli was more on the side of the end justifies the means, while Erasmus sees legacy as being measured by moral impacts, and sometimes it is better to abdicate your throne or kingdom than risk defending it with human blood and suffering of innocent people, which Machiavelli was basically against. He was more of look, you gotta consolidate your power, and even if it means killing, even if it means pillaging, and if it means innocent people having to suffer, as long as you get what you want. And this is from page 19 of Erasmus. Erasmus is more about peaceful means to resolve disputes, to leave a good legacy and an intact kingdom. So Pope John Paul II was my leader from the great souls, sixth grade souls, as someone that embodied a legacy. He really left behind a good legacy. So the Pope was able to use his influence to bring an end to communism in most of Eastern Europe. He did not directly disagree with the communists, but cunningly used his sermons and speeches to speak out against the dangers of communism. He goes to state that a Christian philosophy that highlighted for them how tardy and indeed bankrupt the philosophy of communism had become in the 3 decades it had been in power. This is from Aikman, page 256. His biggest legacy was the way he popularized the Catholic Church globally and his appeal to peace and human dignity, which he also helped to bring an end to the rise of communism in Eastern Europe. So the Pope can be attributed, his biggest legacy, I think, was bringing an end to communism in Eastern Europe and making the Catholic Church much more popular around the world, because it was starting to lose its influence. So he was able to bring back the church, especially the Catholic Church. He was able to bring it back to its, I would say, former glory. So summary and conclusion. I think Machiavelli can be described as a utilitarian, as he tried to use the ends to justify the means, and only one leader from the sixth grade souls could be compared with this philosophy, but that was Nelson Mandela on his initial view towards how to bring an end to apartheid. He wanted to basically use force, but he ended up being peaceful, resolving it peacefully. And then the majority of the leaders from David Aikman, sixth grade souls, were more on the side of the philosophy of Erasmus, morality, virtues, and good Christian ethics. So basically, I think most of the folks from the sixth grade souls fall and are geared towards Erasmus. I think Erasmus had a much more impact on the great souls than Machiavelli did. And there ends the presentation.